Things are moving incredibly fast in West Asia. It seems we're on the brink of a major conflict, and we're here to break down exactly what's happening moment by moment based on the very latest reports.
You know, the source material for this really doesn't pull any punches. It says, flat out, West Asia is at war. That one sentence tells you everything about the gravity of the situation. We're talking about what's being described as an all-out war launched by the United States and Israel against Iran.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at how this whole thing kicked off. Then we'll get into what each side says they want to achieve. After that, we'll dive into what this new kind of aerial battlefield looks like, why this conflict is so different from what we've seen before, and then we'll get to the big one, the ultimate question about the real cost of all this.
All right, let's start at the very beginning. How did this fire even start? You have to understand, people are calling this the most dangerous moment in West Asia since the Iraq War, and it all went down in just a few hours.
So how did it all start? Well, it kicked off with a preemptive attack that just spiraled, you know? It went from one move to a massive, multinational military operation in what felt like the blink of an eye. The timeline is actually pretty startling when you lay it all out. I mean, look at how fast this happened. First, Israeli jets are striking targets right in Tehran. Then, just a few hours go by and boom, American warships are firing Tomahawk missiles. And right after that, we get the official word from the US president himself. This is a major combat operation, and it is on.
And we really need to wrap our heads around the scale of this. The sources are talking about this as a potential mass casualty event, a war that could literally reshape the entire region. So let's be clear, this isn't just another border skirmish. This is the real deal, a full-blown military operation.
Okay, so with an operation this massive, what are the goals? What does each side say it wants? Let's dive into the publicly stated objectives from both the United States and Israel.
Well, the language from the U.S. president is blunt. I mean, listen to this. He says the goal is to totally obliterate Iran's missile industry. There is absolutely no room for interpretation there. Goal number one for the U.S. is to wipe out Iran's missile program, period.
But it's not just about the missiles. The U.S. has laid out a much bigger list of objectives. They're talking about taking out Iran's entire navy, neutralizing its proxies all over the region, making absolutely sure Iran never gets a nuclear weapon, and getting rid of what they're calling imminent threats from the Iranian regime.
Now, over on the Israeli side, Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying things that line up with the US, but he adds a whole other layer. When he says, "This is your chance to establish a new and free Iran," well, that's not just about weapons. That is a pretty clear call for regime change.
So when you put it all together, you can see a really clear, coordinated strategy emerging. It looks like they've divided up the work. Israel is reportedly using its intelligence to focus on the regime itself, on the leadership. Meanwhile, the U.S. is bringing its massive military power to bear on Iran's missiles and its navy.
Okay, so what does a war like this even look like on the ground? Well, that's just it. There isn't really a ground. This is not your typical war with soldiers and front lines. It's something else entirely.
You have to remember, a huge piece of this puzzle is just simple geography. Iran and Israel don't share a border, so a big ground invasion, that's just not really an option. This whole thing is being fought from a distance, in the air and from the sea. We're talking jets, warships, and a whole lot of missiles.
And that brings us to Iran's main playbook here. Their biggest military asset by far is their missile arsenal, and it is massive. We're talking about an estimated 3,000 plus ballistic missiles, and reports say they aren't holding back. They're firing them in waves.
Now, think about this number, 12 minutes. That's it. That's the estimated time it takes for one of those missiles to travel from Iran and hit Israel. 12 minutes. That's an unbelievably tense race against the clock for anyone trying to stop them.
So you can see why that 12-minute window is absolutely everything. In that tiny slice of time, U.S. and Israeli missile defense systems, we're talking everything from ground-based interceptors to warships out at sea, they have to do it all. Detect the launch, track the missile, and destroy it before it reaches its target. It's an incredible technological challenge.
Now you might be thinking, wait, haven't we seen tensions flare up before? And you're right, we have. So what makes this time different? Why is everyone calling this a whole new kind of conflict? Let's get into that.
Well, there are a couple of really big differences. In the past, what we usually saw were limited surgical strikes, right? Maybe targeting a specific nuclear site. This is not that. This is a sustained, ongoing operation hitting not just military hardware, but also the leadership. And here's the other game changer. Before, Iran could always hit back.
Now, with their launch sites being a primary target, their ability to keep retaliating is a huge open question.
And that first point about this being a sustained campaign? A quote from Israel's defense minister really drives it home. The operation will continue for as long as required. It doesn't sound like a quick in-and-out job, does it? That signals a huge strategic shift. They're in this for the long haul.
And that idea of a long haul brings us to our final and maybe most important question. If everyone is digging in their heels for a long, drawn-out war, what does winning even look like? What's the end game? And maybe more importantly, who can actually afford to pay the price?
To figure that out, you really have to understand Iran's strategy. Look, they know they can't go toe-to-toe with the U.S. military and win a conventional fight. That's not the goal. Their strategy is what we call asymmetrical. It's about making the war so painful, so expensive in both money and lives, that eventually the U.S. and Israel just have to say uncle.
And so that's the incredibly dangerous situation we're in right now. It's like a strategic stalemate. You've got the U.S. and Israel saying, we're prepared to do this for as long as it takes. And you've got Iran responding by basically emptying out their entire missile arsenal. It seems like everyone is committed to a long, grinding war that is going to have absolutely devastating consequences.
And that really is the question that hangs over all of this, isn't it? With both sides dug in for a long war, who can truly afford the cost? And we're not just talking about missiles and jets here. We're talking about economic endurance, political willpower, and of course the human cost. As this whole thing escalates, that's the one question that will define everything.
Like, share, subscribe.